You're listening to the Doc Lounge podcast. This is a place for candid conversations with healthcare industry's top physicians, executives, and thought leaders. This podcast is made possible by Pacific Companies, your trusted advisor in physician recruitment. I am your host, Summer Gilbert, and I am the Director of Marketing and Branding here at Pacific Companies. And my co-host today is the one and only Marc Scarlata. Marc is the Director of Permanent Recruitment here at Pacific Companies, and he is the one who got us in contact with the wonderful doctor that we're speaking to today. Today on our Provider's Perspective series, we're talking to Dr. John Hynes. Dr. Hynes is a talented electrophysiologist currently working out of Virginia. Dr. Hynes, thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure.
And Marc, a quick shout out to you. I know you are the reason that Dr. Hynes is on the podcast today. So thank you for building that relationship, and I'm excited to have you as a co-host.
Happy to be here. Thank you, Summer.
Dr. Hynes, let's start out with why cardiology, and more specifically, why did you choose electrophysiology as your subspecialty?
Yeah, sure. And it's interesting because when I became interested in electrophysiology, it was still a well-established subspecialty, but at least through my training, was not a very well-known subspecialty. I think it may have been in part because of where I did my medical school training, although we had a very big medical institution where I trained there, and there was cardiology and interventional cardiology fellowships. There was not an electrophysiology fellowship, and this was back in, when I graduated in medical school, it was 1997. And I actually, went and started my residency at the University of Alabama in Birmingham, thinking I was going to do pulmonary and critical care medicine. And nowadays, I believe that the field of cardiac electrophysiology has, been around for so long, and there has also been so many major advancements in the field that I believe at this stage, the awareness of the subspecialty by even medical students is much, much greater than it was when I was coming out. So that's the difference between then and now. I ended up in the subspecialty was after I started my residency, I happened to be in a residency program at the University of Alabama in Birmingham that had, at the time, three of the premier in kind of, second generation founding fathers of electrophysiology. At the time, and for years after, even after I left, there was Dr. Andy Epstein, Neil Kay, Vance Plum in the clinical side, and then on the research side, Dr. Ray Eidecker. And these were all leaders, not just in the United States, but in the world, in terms of the field of, cardiac electrophysiology. And so during my residency, I was exposed on my rotations through cardiology to these individuals. And it was during those times that I was exposed to them that I really fell in love with this field. And it was a combination of just the personalities of these mentors, as well as the field itself. It started off with just a high interest in understanding EKGs, and not just, the bare minimum, but understanding as much as you could and trying to decipher the different possible reasons for abnormal heart rhythms. Where were these heart rhythms coming from in the heart, and how did these, electrophysiologists understand this information? So it really drew me towards them. And then with many young physicians at that time, there's always an event that occurs that really just, this is what I want to do. And that happened for me during my residency. One patient that was extremely ill, and it was an electrophysiologist who was mainly taking care of the patient in the ICU because she was having refractory ventricular tachycardia, but was too unstable at the time and with the technology that we had to undergo an ablation. So that really, hit home because I was involved with her care as the resident. And so it just grew from that. And then I knew that by my second year of residency that I wanted to do cardiac electrophysiology. So I focused on that through my third year. And so when I finished my residency, I immediately was applying only to programs that, as general cardiology, that had electrophysiology fellowships at their programs.
Yeah. So a few months ago, Dr. Hynes, I had the honor of speaking with Dr. Kamala Tamarisa, who is also an electrophysiologist practicing out of Texas. And she brought me back to the beginning in practicing and just said that cardiology was definitely a male-dominated specialty. Do you still see that today? And have you seen a rise in the amount of women going into this specialty?
I don't know about going into it. In my travels, I have come across some female electrophysiologists. Actually, my co-fellow in fellowship was a female. She was an MD PhD. And, but I still would say that it's probably still a male predominantly oriented field. I do know that over the 2 decades, basically, that I've been in this field, there has been an advancement, though, not only in the representation of females in the field, but also an emphasis on not just in cardiovascular medicine alone, but also in cardiac electrophysiology and the differences between men and women. One of my mentors and attendings while I was at Penn State Hershey Medical Center was Dr. Deborah Wilbert. And she was very much involved both at the local as well as the national level through the Heart Rhythm Society in advancing both women in the field as well as the differences that should be made aware and taking care of patients based upon their gender.
Wow. That's great.
Interesting. Dr. Hynes, you had mentioned that there's usually a defining moment in a physician's career when they have that aha moment that solidifies their decision to go into a particular specialty. However, if you were to speak with a group of general cardiology fellows who maybe were undecided about whether they just wanted to be a general cardiologist or do a fellowship, what would you say to them to encourage them to look into electrophysiology?
It has to do with a combination of their willingness to delay gratification, in the sense of its additional years of training. Also, it has to do with their God-given talents with their hands. This is a subspecialty that is beyond or in addition to intelligence. Obviously, those fellows that are made it to the level of their cardiology fellowships are intelligent people, but it has to do with combining that intelligence and applying it in a procedural oriented field, because that is where the bulk of our time in our career is spent, is actually in the EP lab doing procedures, whether that's implanting devices, now doing structural heart with, the left atrial appendage occluding device, or doing ablations, both simple and complex. You have to have decent hands in order to do that and to do it well. And I've seen, unfortunately, in my career, there are fellows that go into this field, super bright individuals, and I'm not even too proud to say much brighter than even myself. But when it came time to application in the lab, that's where it breaks down in many cases, where they just don't have the skill set to execute what they know is in their mind and make it happen in the EP lab, and to, first of all, have a safe outcome, which is the absolute priority. Then in my professional and personal opinion, success is the secondary outcome. First you want to make sure that whatever you do, you don't do anything within your capability of causing harm. And then, you try to be then to achieve success and the reason you went in there in the first place. Because in my personal practice, I've always had the mindset that, and I've had the opportunity and blessed to meet individuals in my profession that are more talented than I am. And so when I feel that, I've given it my best, or up front, that given my practice parameters and level of experience and exposure to certain things, I may just defer and send these patients to somebody who I know is both very careful, but also can do the procedure with success and accomplish both goals.
Right.
And unfortunately, the level that a fellow will know that, it sometimes is apparent at the level of the general cardiology fellowship. And there are sometimes it doesn't become apparent until they get into the fellowship that this may not be what they should do.
Mm-hmm.
Just to play devil's advocate with you, I suppose, and I don't know if you would agree with me, that one could say that you had mentioned that you have to have good hands and good skills with your hands for EP, which makes all the sense in the world. Could we also make that same blanket statement for interventional cardiology, the wire skills and things of that nature? And if that's the case, what would be your argument if someone was on the fence between, say, EP and interventional? Would it be lifestyle?
Yes, lifestyle. And the skill requirements for interventional cardiology is just as important, and especially now with them getting very heavy into structural heart disease, with TAVR and with MitraClip, and also with the left atrial appendage occluding device,
Watchman,
Watchman, and now the amulet. That's really it, still a deciding factor. But if the skill set is there, lifestyle between the two fields is definitely different, but also it has to do with interest. Mm-hmm. I knew from day one of my cardiology fellowship, I had zero interest in interventional cardiology. Just did not care. I did what I needed to do to understand the at that time the level and what was involved, because I do believe it makes you a better clinician to understand the process. But when I was a little different in the sense of when I started my general cardiology fellowship, one, I already knew that I was going to be doing electrophysiology, and kind of not the rule, but the way that the match system worked. But I had already been promised an EP spot.
Okay.
At the beginning of my general cardiology fellowship. Now, it came with the stipulation that I had to do my general cardiology fellowship at the same place.
Mm-hmm.
But I knew
Makes
when
sense.
I signed on and started my general cardiology fellowship, I had already been promised a EP spot.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
It is a difference. There are, interventionalists that would rather, poke their eyes out than to be in the EP lab.
Oh, wow.
Because it's just a very different mindset between the two subspecialties.
For sure.
Yeah.
There's been some, and I'm sure there's more, but some of the notable type of examples where there's been examples where and these tend to be older physicians that came out trained in interventional cardiology and then went back and did electrophysiology. I think he's retired now, but Dr. Seth Worley.
Well, that name sounds familiar.
Well, he invented the Worley catheter.
Okay.
And he was down at Lancaster General in Pennsylvania. And he was originally, and where he bridged his interventional skills that he had learned was in the field of biventricular pacing and defibrillator, where the placement of the LV lead was. That was an absolutely brand new field back in the late 90s and early 2000s. And he did a lot of pioneering work in developing catheters and techniques for successful placement of the LV lead. And he was blessed with that skill set from knowing different interventional catheters and wires and things along those lines that, an electrophysiologist would never have been aware of because we just, didn't have that exposure.
Yeah.
But that's kind of uncommon for an interventionalist to switch over to EP. But there are cases where physicians have done that, and like I said, most notably, Dr. Worley was one of those.
Interesting.
Dr. Hynes, over the years, I'm sure you've had a lot of interesting cases. If you were to summarize one that stands out to you in your career so far, what one would that be?
There's been quite a few over the years. I would say that one of my most interesting EP cases was a middle-aged man who had a PVC-induced non-ischemic cardiomyopathy, was, very symptomatic, probably, if I recall, a New York Heart Association functional class 3. And his ejection fraction was definitely, over a very short period of time, leading towards, an ejection fraction less than 35%. So I saw his EKG and looked at it, recognized that this was most likely a papillary muscle PVC and non-sustained ventricular tachycardia that we had documented on outpatient monitoring. And so I took him to the lab to ablate this. And this historically is a difficult PVC to eliminate with radiofrequency ablation because of catheter stability at this location. And a group of EP docs down, I think, in Brazil a number of years ago had written an article using cryotherapy with a fair high degree of success, because it basically freezes to the location and it allows for a better lesion. So I had done one with cryo before, and so I said, okay, we're going to get ready to do this. Well, we had changed labs, we locations, and we were getting ready to go, and the cable for the cryo ablation console was missing.
Oh, no.
and I, I was just like, yo, you gotta be kidding me. And we're in the case. And so we switched over to RF, and we had also used the new HD grid mapping system with Abbott Medical, which was just beautiful, that showed us the location. And with radio frequency and then with the use of intracardiac echo, we started off, and I was able to suppress the PVC, but it would come back. And then finally, with just careful manipulation, I was actually able to, with intracardiac echo, literally wrap the ablation catheter around the papillary muscle.
Wow.
Like a noodle around, a fork. And it came on RF. That catheter didn't budge. And we were successfully eliminated that PVC. I had never, with such, the ICE images were beautiful to show the catheter stability throughout the entire lesion. And then the PVC never came back, and with follow-up over a year, still no recurrence, and his EF had returned to normal, and he was no longer symptomatic. So that was an extremely rewarding case.
Wow. So interesting.
Sounds very involved.
Yeah.
What was nice was, and it highlights a not, unfortunately, an uncommon, not common, but not uncommon scenario that comes up in any type of procedural related field, where, either something happens with the recording equipment, you got to troubleshoot it during the case, or in this case, we thought we had, everything that we needed for the procedure, and we ended up not having it. And so it teaches you how to adapt. And that's one of the things, whether it's interventional cardiology, EP, interventional radiology, surgeries, any of those type of fields, you get into something and an unexpected, challenge comes up, and you have to say, okay, if we're not going to harm the patient, we need to move forward.
Yeah.
The patient's,
Sure.
all that and the other that's gone on, and you're there. And so, you would do what you need to do to change course, and you still come out with a successful case. And that's something that, that you have to also with time learn how to, accomplish that.
Think on your feet.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
And to me, that's got to be one of the most interesting things about being a physician, is that every case is so unique, and there's a lot of thinking on your feet and a lot of collaboration with colleagues, and left to center thinking that's involved in every single case. One thing I do want to ask you, Dr. Hynes, is if you had to go back to the beginning and you couldn't choose cardiology or electrophysiology, what specialty do you think you would have chosen?
Would you go back to the pulmonary critical care?
No, actually, no. It's a very easy answer. Interventional radiology.
Okay.
Good choice.
Wow.
Good choice.
I would do that. I would do interventional radiology in a heartbeat. In a lot of ways, it bridges a lot of similarities between interventional cardiology and EP, in the sense of catheter placement, guide wires,
imaging technology.
Imaging technology, probably more over in the interventional cardiology side, with regards to, angiography and stent placements. But I would do interventional radiology if I could not do interventional cardiology or EP.
Just such a diversity of cases, where obviously EP, you're focused on the heart, and interventional radiology could be literally anywhere.
Yeah.
It can. And I was blessed. I was actually, as a medical student, where I was located, I got to, and I don't believe he's practicing anymore, but Dr. Palma's stent, or Dr. Palma's was, who was the inventor of the stent, was still on staff in the interventional radiology department where I was in medical school. And I got to watch him do a case. I was a medical student, and the patient was an OB-GYN patient with a bleeding complication, and the attending that was on was not having much success. And so they called Dr. Palmas, and he just blew in, slapped on some gloves and gown, and then done, and he walked out.
Yeah.
I mean, and so that was watching really the master at work. And so it was an honor to be able to get to watch him do his case. So
interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
I would choose if I couldn't do what I'm doing now.
Good choice.
So, Dr. Hynes, this question goes specifically to the residents and fellows that are doing the rotations and trying to figure out what they want to choose, what it is that they want to go into and specialize in. Is there something that like a feeling, like a spark, what advice could you give them to give them some clarity going through this part of picking what they're going to do for the rest of their career as a physician?
It's where they have the most interest, and where their real passion lies. I started off going to medical school thinking I was going to do orthopedic surgery, and through it's when I got to my clinical rotations that changed, and I knew I wanted to do a procedural related field, because I was worked in my father's machine shop, and I was very handy with my hands. So I did want to do, and I knew way early on before medical school that I wanted to do something along those lines. So then it became, either pulmonary critical care or GI. Believe it or not, even after leaving, graduating from medical school, the last thing on my mind was cardiology.
Wow.
I didn't have any interest in it. I had friends graduating from medical school that knew they wanted to be a cardiologist, and I would tell them absolutely no way did I want to do cardiology. So then it's then it was the rotations and the experience. So that to answer your question, it's something that if the medical student hasn't made up their mind, don't panic, because there's plenty of time to decide.
Mm-hmm.
And it will come.
Well said. Yeah.
It will come. There will be something that comes along and will show, okay, this is what I really, really want to do. And there are opportunities at the medical school level to do a bunch of different things to try to find out what that is. That's built in.
Mm-hmm. If
you know that's what you really want, then you can actually start doing a lot of it. And then that would answer your question. Okay, yeah, I really, this, I'm confirmed this is what I want.
Yeah.
Or no, well then in residency, there's that opportunity again, because you're doing rotation through all these different subspecialties. And so that opportunity again to either find what you want to do, if you haven't found out already, or change your mind. There's not a lot of cases, but I don't know about from medicine to surgery, but I do know from when I was a resident, we had a couple of surgical residents switch from surgery to medicine. Well, that was back in the day when the pyramid system was still in existence. And I don't know if that still exists in surgery residencies or not anymore. But I tell you, those residents, because I was a senior resident when we had a couple come over from surgery, they were phenomenal. They made extremely good residents, very bright, and then also extremely talented with their hands. Obviously. So that does occur as well.
Wow. That's some great insight. So one of my favorite things about this podcast is the collaboration that it creates. And Dr. Hynes has selflessly given us his email to put in the description. So if you are a physician listening and you want some advice or to collaborate, to talk about a case, if you are a medical student and you have some questions on electrophysiology and choosing that specialty, he has opened himself up to be available to you guys to answer any questions. So please don't hesitate to reach out to him.
I'm always interested in helping not just medical students or residents, but over my travels, now I have 16 years of clinical experience under my belt. I avail myself to young electrophysiologists as well, that are, out there, that, maybe struggling or find themselves in situations that, they didn't expect coming out of fellowship. Because in my career, I've also built 2 EP programs from scratch. And so you learn a lot by going through that as well. So, I've helped a lot of young electrophysiologists with just questions, and then, residents and medical.
Yeah, and one of the most powerful things about this podcast, and this is what I think separates us from any others that are out there similar, is that connection that we're bringing. We've had doctors reach out to other doctors that have had similar cases for help, for collaboration. And that, to me, is priceless, because, there's patients every day around the country needing help, and doctors are seeing, some doctors are seeing something for the first time that another doctor has seen multiple times. And by listening to this podcast, we're creating that connection. And it's something that we value so deeply here. And that's one of the main reasons for this podcast.
Yeah. And I don't mind my email. I'm old school. I don't have any social media accounts.
Okay.
But one of my friends, and he's actually, and it's really worked well, Dr. Roderick Tung, who's a cardiac electrophysiologist who is just rapidly advanced through the ranks and is now a star in the field on the international level. And he actually really advanced his career in the sense of, I'm out there by using social media. He'll have these really very, very interesting cases, and then immediately afterwards post it on Facebook or whatever. And physicians are able to take, I've had many people say, John, you need to do the same thing. And I'm like, no, I'm old.
Yeah.
Well, for the listeners, I still have an AOL account.
Yeah.
So that will give the people of my simplicity age.
And I know, Dr. Hynes, we're out of time, but it just sounds to me, Summer, like we're set up for another future podcast with Dr. Hynes.
Yeah.
To learn some more.
Yep. I agree.
Be my pleasure.
Well, Dr. Hynes, thank you so much. Thank you for all that you do. We appreciate you. And we hope to get you back on the podcast real soon.
My pleasure.
We appreciate your time.
All right.
Oh, thank you much. It's definitely something that I really enjoy doing, and Marc will probably be able to know from some of our conversations that It really, as I've gotten older and have gone through things in my own personal life, it's really an opportunity that I value greatly to come into contact with people who really are at a very vulnerable period of their life because they are sick. And it really is a time and an opportunity and a relationship I treasure in getting to know these patients.
Well, there's no hiding that. You can absolutely tell. It shines right through you, Dr. Hynes. So,
Oh, thank you.
And once again, thank you so much for your time, and we'll make sure to be in touch.
Appreciate it, Dr. Hynes.
Bye.
All right, bye-bye.
Thanks. Take care.
Thank you to all our listeners. If you'd like to be notified when new episodes air, make sure to hit that subscribe button. And a big thank you to Pacific Companies. Without you guys, this podcast could not be possible. If you would like to be a guest, go to www.pacificcompanies.com. Thank you.